Hand of the day.
What's up, guys? It's Alec Torelli. Welcome to the Hand of the Day. I'm bringing you this one from the Intercontinental in Koh Samui. Beautiful place here. And I got a cool question from one of my readers who's playing heads up cash game on full tilt. The blinds are 25 cent, 50 cent. We are pretty deep stacked here. And the button, who's the hero in the hand, raises it up with two aces to 150. He gets 3-bet in the big blind to 450, and he decides to 4-bet here to $9. Now, he goes on to tell me in his message, he sent me a long message, which was really detailed, and he says that they were really deep stacked at the table, but the villain doesn't 3-bet often, and he says that the villain's range is very tight in this hand. So he thinks he has something like ace queen, king queen, or premium hands only. And he says that he's only gone to showdown twice when the villain 3-bet, but the villain always had really, really strong hands. And he says that he decided to make it $9 here because he always makes it double the raise size of the 3-bet to sort of balance his range, right? So I get the idea of balancing your range, and I think it's important to use the same sizing and make the same bets with all the hands that you have. However, even if you're going to adopt that strategy, which has merit depending on your opponent. If your opponent is aware of this strategy, you should adopt it. If he's not aware of that strategy, you should simply mix it up and play the hand the best way possible, even if you are potentially being unbalanced. Because if your opponent's never going to realize you're unbalanced, especially in spots that don't come up often, then it's sort of okay to do so. Still, even if you decide I need to have the same raise size all the time when I make these 4-bets, you should be going much bigger. Why? Because number one, your opponent's range is very strong and he's not going to fold. So the types of hands you should be 4-betting with are hands for value, hands that beat his narrow 3-betting range, right? You're only going to be 4-betting with strong hands, and given that you know he has a really strong range and you're extremely deep stacked, he's going to probably call your 4-bet wider. He's probably not going to fold to your 4-bet pretty much regardless of your size within reason. So I would much rather see you make it $12 here, $13 here, something like that builds the pot while you're in position, because your strategy is to only 4-bet with strong hands because you know he has a strong range and he's not going to fold. So I think this is it sounds like it might be a small mistake, but I think this mistake compounds throughout the hand as the pot size gets bigger, because when you inflate the pot pre-flop, you allow that decision that you made to compound on the flop, turn, and then eventually on the river, where you can get your entire stack in if the board runs out favorably. So I think that's a semi-big mistake, and I think it's worth noting here. Now, he ends up calling, which we expect, and the flop comes queen 10-9 rainbow. Villain checks, and it's sort of the same story here on the flop. We decide to bet $5. And that's about a fourth of the pot. And your logic again is the same. I would bet $5 with my entire range here. I always bet a fourth of the pot in these sort of situations. Well, I think in this spot you should be betting bigger. I think for two reasons. One is that you're repping a strong range with a 4-bet pre-flop, and the second is that this board is very, very coordinated. So if the board was completely dry, like a texture like 7 deuce deuce, you could argue for a smaller bet size because you're not repping that many hands, and there's not that many cards that could come that change the difference between your range and his range. In other words, you're repping an overpair, and on a board like 7 deuce deuce, you either have it or you don't, and there's not that many cards that could come on the turn or the river that could change what you're actually repping. So on boards like that, where your opponent probably didn't flop a lot of equity, he's only going to continue with overpairs, you could bet smaller. But on board textures like this, where it's queen 10-9, a lot of his range connected with this board in some way. And so I would go for a bigger bet size here and try and build the pot, because it's likely that he's going to call. And it's also a board that you're probably not going to be c-betting that light. It's possible that you connected with it. It just gives a lot of credence to betting bigger. So anyway, you bet 5, he check calls, and the turn comes to 7. And now the villain checks again, and we decide to check back here. And you go on to tell me that you think it's unlikely that he's going to pay you off 3 streets with top pair plus. He's only going to call with 2 pair or better. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I would sort of question that logic, right? If he's only going to call this bet on the turn and on a blank river with 2 pair or a set, then you should pretty much be betting this turn and river with any 2 cards, because there's not enough 2 pair and set combos that your opponent could have that he's going to continue with. So if that's true, maybe you could argue for a check here. I would probably bet the turn and then maybe consider checking the river if your opponent really is that tight of a player. I don't think that many people are that tight heads up, but maybe he is, right? If you know something very, very extreme about your opponent, fine. I would still probably argue for a turn bet here, and I would bet like 3/4 the pot, whatever. But if your opponent is only going to be, if your read is correct and he's only going to be continuing with 2 pair plus, then I would be betting this turn here with like ace king, and then I would just be bluffing the river because your opponent's not going to have 2 pair or a set that often on this board in a 4-bet pot. So it's sort of like either something's wrong with your read or your logic, or your opponent is a very exploitable type of player, which you should be making some adjustments depending on what you have, or in different situations to exploit it, like I just mentioned. So you gotta sort of really be objective with yourself and say, like, which one of these is it? Or are you kind of scared that the pot's sort of big and you don't want to go broke with 2 aces, you didn't know what to do, it's like kind of scary, and then you just checked? Or was it really something that was analytical and that was based on the numbers and actually had some weight to it? And that's sort of like a challenge that I would have to here. I would go with a bet on the turn here personally. So anyway, the river comes king. Okay, so now there's 1 card to a straight, and your opponent overbet jams. And you sort of ask me, you're like, the river comes a king, it's the worst card in the deck for me. I'm assuming his range in this spot is Jack-Jack, King-King, occasionally Ace-Queen, and all the random Jack-X hands. So, and you ask me, what's the best way to adjust this strategy in the future, and did I make any mistakes? Well, I think, first of all, your idea of his range is a little bit off. I know I'm being a little hard on you in this video, but I gotta tell you the truth, because I'm really trying to help you improve your game here. I don't think that he has something like Ace-Queen, and I don't think that he has King-King. I think that his range here is Jacks, and that's it. He can only have a Jack in this spot. I don't think he's ever going to bluff here because it's too likely that he's risking too much to win too small of a pot, and the times that you have a Jack, which are very possible, you could have something like even like Jack-9 might play a hand this way, like Jack-4 suited, like you could have some Jacks in your range here. It's not like you can't have a Jack. And so I think he's just risking too much to win too small of a pot. But I think you have an absolutely clear fold. I think the real tough question here is what hands do you call this river with? Now, I think the size of his bet makes me think something about the level that your opponent is thinking on. I think from his point of view, he realizes that you can't have Ace-Jack, and he can, because you probably would have bet the turn with that hand. So I think that he's probably really decent at hand reading, and he realizes that his range in this spot is stronger than yours because he can have Ace-Jack more easily than you. So anytime that his range is stronger than yours, it's a good spot to bet very big, and vice versa. So I mean, I think that he's probably going to shove this river with Jacks to try and get you to fold a chop, and he's also repping Ace-Jack where he knows that like you can't really have Ace-Jack because most of the time you would have bet the turn. I mean, it's not always true. Some of the time you would check the turn, but I mean, he's definitely saying, I have Ace-Jack here. So, I mean, I think I would probably call the river with a Jack here because, like, the times he has Ace-Jack are pretty small. And if he's going to shove every single combination of Jacks, then I think you're getting good enough odds to call. But, you can't call here with anything worse than that. And I also think it's important to realize that he's never shoving with like Ace-Queen as a bluff because it's just too suicidal. If he had Ace-Queen and he decided to turn it into a bluff to get you to fold Ace-King, he doesn't need to shove like 6x the pot. He can simply bet 3/4 the pot and you're going to fold Ace-King probably regardless, or maybe he can bet 1.2x the pot and you're going to fold Ace-King. So I don't think he needs to bet that big, and I don't think he's ever going to shove for value with a worse hand like 3 kings because it would be suicidal. He's never going to get called by worse, so why would he turn his 3 kings into a bluff? If he had a set of kings, he would probably just bet half the pot and try and get paid. So I just think that there's some questionability to your hand reading here on the river, but I think that this spot is one where you could only call with a jack. So the way that you sort of not get exploited in this spot, well, to be honest, it's unlikely that you don't really have to worry about getting exploited in spots where they just don't come up that often. In other words, the only way he could really exploit you here is if the river comes a king and then he overbet jams. Like, how often do you have to defend against the river coming a king? Secondly, you could check back some jacks on the turn, and I think that you would do that. So I think that your natural game plan would be balanced enough that you're going to have some jacks here when you check the turn. So I don't think you have to worry too much about like being exploited in this spot, because I think you're going to show up on the river with maybe even ace jack, but so you're going to show up on the river with a jack often enough that you could call a large bet on the river here. So don't worry too much about spots that like just come up super infrequently and that require very, very specific runouts in order for your opponent to take advantage of them, right? So you have to defend against the most likely possibility of runouts, not against the more infrequent ones. So that's it, man. Good hand, good question. I think in general the big thing to take away from this one is just a little bit of your sizing here. I think by building the pot a lot bigger pre-flop and then betting bigger on the flop, you set yourself up for like even a jam on the turn or an easy bet on the turn that puts your opponent in a spot where a lot of pressure is on the hand. If you replay this hand and you make it 13 pre-flop and now the pot's $26 and then you bet 20 on the flop, then you're in a spot where your stack to pot ratio on the turn is much smaller and you can justify getting all the money in on the turn or the river, which is what you want to do when you have two aces in spots like these. By keeping the pot really, really small, I agree with you. Maybe like when the pot is so small and your stack to pot ratio is so big, it's kind of scary to bet the turn because you don't really know what to do, because if he check raises you, it's just like a bad spot to be in. Whereas if you made the pot a lot bigger, it would make this hand a lot easier to play, especially in lieu of the tendencies of your opponent. So I hope you like this hand. Please subscribe to my channel and share this with someone you think would benefit. I greatly appreciate it. And if you guys have questions you'd like me to answer, send them to me on alectorelli.com and click on submit your hands. You can submit all your hands to me through my website, and please only send them to me there so I can pick the best ones and feature them here on this channel. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys from Koh Samui. Cheers.